Hi, I'm Kalashian with Live and Invest Overseas, and today we're talking Spain because you may be aware Spain has had some protests lately. There have been, starting in 2024 and going into this year, there have been some protests, and some of the zealous protesters have occasionally filled up water guns and sprayed them at tourists as they walked by or underneath their windows. So, for example, we've gotten letters recently telling us to stop promoting Spain. They don't want foreigners, telling us that the country is already oversaturated. Why would you send more people there? And questions from people asking us to confirm, do the Spanish really not want foreigners here? Are people really shooting tourists with water guns when they come in? So today, let's dig into this a little bit deeper. So the background, as I said, this started in 2024 and it's gone on into 2025. There have been some big protests with hundreds of people out in the streets in the Balearic Islands, the Canary Islands, and on the mainland, mostly in Barcelona and Malaga, which are two very touristed cities, and also cruise ship stops. So first of all, to clarify a little bit, these protests are against mass tourism and the way that that impacts local life. And again, mainly this is against cruise ship passengers. So let's put it this way. Nobody likes tourists, nobody likes tourists in their hometown. Nobody wants to be a tourist. You always want to try and blend in a little bit wherever you are. So imagine if you're in your hometown and it was suddenly overrun just within 10 minutes or an hour, say, overrun with tens of thousands of people who don't speak your language and refuse to even try. They won't say hello, please, thank you, goodbye. And they just yell at you in their own language. They're clogging the streets and the sidewalks. They're stopping in the middle of, the passageways to look at the directions on their phone. They're creating lines at all of your favorite places. Your restaurants don't have seats for you. That they come to gawk at your monuments or your sites or, maybe go to a museum, but without wanting to understand any history or meaning behind anything that they're seeing, and on and on and on. You can imagine how that would get quite tiresome after, just one episode of that. But imagine that goes on every single day for many, many months of the year, and it's been going on increasingly in the past several years. So it's not necessarily that Spaniards hate tourists, although I'm the first to say I think nobody loves a tourist. Nobody even wants to be a tourist. You always want to, at least I think most people want to try and blend in a little bit when they go to a new place. But as I say, Spaniards don't necessarily hate tourists, but the places where they're protesting are mainly these cruise ship ports where tens of thousands of people get off for just a few hours. They have no intention of appreciating the local culture, speaking Spanish. They may spend a little money, which might bring in some nice income for your town, but they probably leave behind litter, and they have a big impact on local life. Although I will say, on the other hand, I mentioned that tourism income. I think any very heavily touristed city would be pretty unhappy with the unemployment levels if all of a sudden tourists were cut off cold turkey from visiting. And in fact, some cities, especially in Italy, some cities are really happy with tourists and getting more cruise ship passengers stopping by. So Barcelona is one city that's had to deal with this already. So in 2024, the mayor, Colboni, he increased the nightly tourist tax and limited cruise ship visitors. So that had a little bit of an impact. He also plans to raise the tourist tax again on cruise ship passengers specifically, or anyone staying less than 12 hours. So you can see these are really targeted plans, really targeted laws. It's not saying we don't want tourists at all, but it's saying that, maybe the cruise ships need to find a more sustainable way to have people come on land to visit. And one of the other big changes is that he would like to, not to say that that will happen, but he would like to end short-term rentals in Barcelona completely by 2028. The thinking is that when tourists come in, they're willing to pay a premium, especially during the high season. Landlords up their rental rates and the home market inflates a little bit, and that has an impact on the local housing costs as well. How much this will actually play out the way the mayor wants it to has yet to be seen, but already short-term rentals are very, very regulated and limited in most cities in Europe, Paris, for example, and now Barcelona, and many others. However, the rest of Spain, other than those few places I mentioned, it really doesn't have a major tourist problem. And the biggest point that I want to make here is to draw the difference between a tourist and someone looking to move to Spain. So if you're moving to Spain, you're not a tourist. You may be a foreigner, but you're not a tourist. If you move here, you're going to learn Spanish at least a little bit. You're going to try and integrate at least a little bit. And you must appreciate your new home's culture. Otherwise, why would you be here? There must have been something about the culture that attracted you and brought you in. So clearly there's things there that you want to appreciate and hopefully learn about, explore, discover, etc. And as another note, Spain's population density is pretty low compared to other major countries in Europe. So expats moving in, even in high numbers, won't tip the scales anytime soon, unless they all go to the same little village, obviously, which is not the case. All right, so let's get to some of our questions that we've had recently. So does Spain really want expats and retirees? What about those water guns being shot at tourists? Yes, Spain absolutely welcomes expats and retirees, especially those who contribute to the local economy as a retiree, expat, or real estate buyer. The government has even created multiple residency options like the non-lucrative visa and the digital Nomad visa to make moving here even easier. As I said, those water gun stories are isolated efforts in the very over-touristed areas like Barcelona and Mallorca, and they're aimed at rowdy short-term tourists. And frankly, being sprayed with a water gun in Spain in summer is probably a welcome relief. I don't know if it's going to have the effect that they want it to. But actually, this is another point that I didn't mention. The other part of the tourism that people don't like is the quick stag weekends, the bachelor party weekends, the bachelorette party weekends, the birthday weekends, etc., where people come in. And I think there's especially a stereotype against the Brits who go to Europe and have, a crazy wild weekend in name the country, name the city. And they're quite disrespectful. They might be urinating, throwing up in public. They're loud. They're, maybe playing music too loud, maybe having parties where they shouldn't be having parties. And they're generally there just to, pretty much just get wasted and has nothing to do with the actual culture there. So for example, Amsterdam was really sick of having tourists come in for bachelor party weekends. And they actually had an anti-tourism campaign asking people to stop coming for bachelor parties. Another city, I forget where, has asked that tourists please just be dressed at all times, because tourists have a tendency, especially in hot weather places, to just walk around in a bathing suit, or maybe without a top on, or maybe without shoes on. So these are things, it's a city, it's not Disneyland. It's a city where people live, and they just want to have you respect them, respect their culture, respect their city, and not treat it like some kind of open air resort or open air theme park. This is a place where people really live. So if you're out on the streets at 4 a.m. screaming or singing, throwing bottles, having a fight, that really impacts people's lives. As a respectful foreign resident or retiree, you will be warmly welcomed. These little cases of people partying too hard, it's definitely a certain demographic. All right, our next question. I heard that Spain wants to tax properties purchased by foreigners at 100%. Is that true? So I borrowed this answer from Leif Simon, our international tax expert, who has replied to say Spain recently eliminated their golden visa program. That is true. It was a property investment for residency scheme, but the cancellation wasn't aimed at people who wanted to live in Spain, but to those who just wanted easy access to the EU without actually living in Europe. So this is mainly Chinese and Russian people who just want to buy their way into a country and not necessarily even visit, let alone live there. So if for a nationality that requires a visa to enter the Schengen zone, getting a Spanish passport or residency is a very, valuable thing. So they're willing to pay for it. However, if you are, living there and actually, as we say, integrating, not just buying up houses and inflating a real estate market without any intention of actually going there, it's a very different situation. So right now, this law that we're talking about is currently in Spanish Parliament, and it would create a 100% tax on the price of property for someone who is not an EU citizen or resident. However, the law is not passed yet. And if it does, as we understand it in its current form, it would apply only to non-residents and non-citizens of the EU. That would mean that you can get your legal residency in Spain first and then buy without that extra tax affecting you. Of course, we will have to wait and see if that law passes and what form it will be when it does finally, if it does. Meanwhile, the residency is viable. We recommend renting for 6 months to a year before buying anyway. So, you don't necessarily go in and buy right away anyway. Bottom line, the law hasn't passed. If it does, having residency is your protection. Next question that we've got, do Spanish people like North Americans? Generally speaking, yes. Spaniards tend to be warm, welcoming, curious about Americans, very gregarious. I've also found that they're much less judgmental than many other Europeans. It helps that Spanish are some of the more outgoing people in Europe, a trait that they share with North Americans. We are also very outgoing. And in addition, over the years, I have seen that Spanish people appreciate American culture. Many speak English, especially in the coastal cities or touristed cities, and they're very happy to share their own language and their own traditions. As always, the respectful attitude and an effort to engage with the local life will go a long way. Next question, what about the flooding that happened in 2024 in Valencia? Should I be worried if I'm thinking about moving there? No, you don't need to worry. So again, a little bit of background. In October 2024, a rare and extremely intense storm caused deadly flash floods, 100-year flood, basically, in parts of Valencia, the region, not necessarily the city. Tragically, it did claim over 230 lives. These were mostly elderly people living in lower income suburbs and rural towns, unfortunately, where the drainage and infrastructure was just not up to the beating it took from this storm. Valencia city itself remained pretty much protected thanks to its robust infrastructure, including modern flood defenses that were built in the past 50 years because of for this exact reason, to protect it from potential floods. To help prevent further disasters, Spain has launched a 530 million euro national plan to widen riverbeds, improve drainage, and introduce green water-absorbing projects throughout the country, making floods in the future far less likely and better managed. Next question. If I move to Spain, would I have to learn Spanish? So you don't have to, but learning even basic Spanish will greatly improve your day-to-day life here. In popular expat areas, especially along the Mediterranean coast, you'll find that many people do speak English, especially in the service industry. But for dealing with bureaucracy, for making local friends, and really integrating into the local culture, a little effort goes a long way. The good news is that unlike the French, I live in France right now, Spanish speakers don't mind, and they really appreciate when foreigners muddle through with whatever language they're able to speak. And I can speak from firsthand experience trying to speak both. You definitely get more patience in Spain. Could Spain be the place for you abroad? You'll never know until you visit the place for yourself, but you can't do it as a tourist. These are the points that I'm trying to make here. You need to meet locals. You need to live a local life. Meet some expats who have already made the move. Go to the grocery stores, rent a car, drive around, or take public transportation, whatever the done thing is wherever you're going. Try not to be a tourist. Try to live a much more local life and experience that for yourself. And the best way I know to do that is to join us in Valencia for our Live and Invest in Spain conference this September. I will be there with several dozen of our close friends and colleagues on the ground there, including many expats. And, Spain checks so many boxes. It's got great weather, beautiful beaches, one of the lowest costs of living and real estate in Europe, the history, the culture, the healthy food, the dining options, English-speaking communities, international standard healthcare, all the conveniences and comforts of a developed 21st century lifestyle. And if you're not cut out for life in the developing world, I would definitely put Spain at the top of your list. That said, again, the only way to know if you are made for Spain, if Spain is made for you, is to show up and take a look around. You've got to get on a plane, spend some time getting to know the place firsthand. And the best opportunity for that is to come down and join us for our event. You'll be in the company of dozens of like-minded others who are also considering Spain as a place to launch their dreams overseas. And it really is the best way to get a feel for it. Plus, once you're over here, you could take the time to explore some other countries and compare them and see if perhaps another part of Europe is calling your name. I hope to see you there. Happy trails. And as always, for more from Live and Invest Overseas every week, like and subscribe. And do click that link if you're interested in joining me in Valencia. I hope to see you there.